Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that means New Comic Book Day here in America and around the world. When jello-molded man blobs heave themselves up out of their parents' basement and waddle to their LCS, their local comic shop, where they stand reading stuff they don't intend to buy with their bellies pressed against the new release counter so that people who go there for the new releases intending to buy them have to say, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, over and over again to the same person standing right there while you angle around them like you were trying to hug them, even though no one in their life has ever tried to do that. Because shame and perspective are completely dead. So a person completely pressed against the one spot on a Wednesday that anybody is shopping and not caring at all no longer bothers to move himself. Instead, he needs someone to say, excuse me, 35 times. And the reason why that's fresh in my mind is because every Wednesday I remember doing stuff like that. I used to go to my local comic shop every Wednesday when I was in the country and buy latest issues of whatever was interesting me. You could almost always count on there being a Legion of Superheroes comics until the present day. I could almost always count on Superman or Action Comics, on some adventure of Superman being interesting to me. Sometimes there were Superboy comics, The Adventures of Superman when he was a boy, or The Adventures of a clone of Superman, the later incarnation of Superboy, and so on down the line. There was almost always something to draw me to a comic shop. Two factors really combined to stop that to break the back of that habit. The first one was that prices skyrocketed. I remember when there was a rumor going around the comic shops and in the letters page of Marvel Comics particularly that the price of comics was going to go up from 20 cents to 25 cents an issue. And I remember thinking, well, if these things go to 25 cents an issue, then they're too expensive to be a hobby anymore. And now they're $5 an issue. And that I realized that production costs have gone up, but they haven't gone up that much. It's just ridiculous. Comics are way too expensive now, especially since they're half ads now, as the page count of original content has dropped as the price has gone up. And that was bad enough, but also the comic book industry has changed. Now comic book producers, especially the two superhero producers, Marvel and DC, know that their audience is older and with maybe more disposable income, so they will buy books. They will buy collected volumes of comics. So they now regularly do that for almost everything. There's a trade paperback down the line for almost every ongoing comic. And not only does that mean that if you buy into the whole thing, you're paying for the same story twice, but it also has affected the writers of the individual issues who are now pacing their stories for that trade paperback and not really thinking so much about individual issues, which is disastrous for the individual issues. You will often get now, if you know ahead of time that some comic book that you bought, on the stands today is the first part of a 6 or 8 part storyline, before you go in that virtually nothing will happen in that first issue, and you're often right. And those two things, the fact that I can buy these things in book form rather than have them rotting around as individual issues, and how expensive the individual issues are, the book form is often less money, combined to sort of disenchant me from the comic shops. So I gradually petered off buying individual issues, but I still like to go to the local comic shop whenever I can, and so I peruse the websites of upcoming stuff. I peruse the websites, I study them actually, to see what's coming out on this coming Wednesday, so that I know whether or not there's anything there that I'm going to want to get. It helps me to prioritize my visits to my local comic shop. And I went out and about today, just briefly, but I ran out of time in no time at all, and my errands didn't take me anywhere near my local comic shop, and I wasn't really compelled to make the extra effort, because the only thing on the list for today that seemed even remotely interesting for me to buy that wasn't hugely overpriced. There was a Tomb of Dracula volume which should have great Gene Colan artwork, but it was $100. That's just absurd. But there was an item for $30, Justice League: The Darkseid War, which was one of those sprawling event type things that DC Comics did a few years ago that went on forever, and that it wasn't just in the Justice League comics, it spilled over into everything, and really became so amorphous that if you were interested you would be buying 30 comics every week just to keep up with the slightest little detail. And I didn't do that. I ignored it completely. And this volume that's on sale today, I didn't actually see it. I didn't go to a comic shop. It wasn't incentive enough for me to go. But this volume that was out today was the essential Justice League Darkseid War, so only collecting the issues in which something actually happens. So it would have been theoretically of interest to me. But it never worked out logistically, and I don't think it's going to tomorrow either. But when I was thinking about it, I realized that even though I didn't actually get that graphic novel, I can still bore the bejesus out of you with a long talk about it, because I wouldn't have talked about that graphic novel much anyway. Instead, even if I had got it, I would still have cornered you and bored you cross-eyed talking about both the Justice League and Darkseid, rather than that specific comic book. And those of you who don't follow comics closely might still know who Darkseid is, because his name has come up, but in movies. But he was the creation of the legendary Marvel Comics artist Jack Kirby, who briefly left Marvel Comics for DC Comics and created this supervillain. And he's got a stony face and glowing eyes, and his name is Darkseid, and he's evil, and he rules a planet called Apocalypse. Insert heavy sigh here. And he has a bunch of evil lieutenants of all different kinds, and he also commands an army of quasi-mechanical, quasi-biological beings called parademons. And he hates everything that's living, and he wants to destroy everything, and he wants to rule everything. And I thought you wanted to destroy everything. Well, now you're saying you want to rule everything. Now you're saying you want to rule everything. I thought you wanted to destroy everything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. My name's Darkseid. I don't need much in the way of precision when it comes to motivation. Like every other original character that Jack Kirby ever created, Darkseid is one note, incredibly boring, incredibly derivative, and doesn't make any sense at all. He's just he's like Thanos in the Marvel universe. He's just this big, one-size-fits-all evil villain who's dedicated to evil, and that's about as far as it goes. Fans loved him. Fans at DC Comics had not had a villain like that really before, and now they did. And this series for the Justice League was just a gigantic fight between Darkseid and the Justice League. And for those of you who might not be familiar with comics, I can't believe that you'd be watching this video if you are. But the Justice League is DC Comics' signature superhero team. I say this a little begrudgingly because, of course, one of DC Comics' other superhero teams is the Legion of Superheroes, my favorite superhero team. But even so, the Justice League is their marquee team, and it's composed of legendary, iconic comic book characters like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern, and it being a Justice League fan underscores the differences between Marvel Comics and DC Comics. It's just a little hobby horse I have harped on a couple of times in these videos. Marvel Comics was created from the ground up by Stan Lee with fantastic artists. Jack Kirby was one of them. Steve Ditko was another. And a great partnership that developed eventually between him and John Romita Sr. But Marvel Comics... the characters themselves were very much Stan Lee glomming onto the 60s counterculture, navel-gazing cultural moment, with the result that the characters are the bare-bones characters leave a little to be desired in terms of dramatic compulsion. So you have, for instance, the Hulk is a nuclear physicist named Bruce Banner who is hyper-irradiated with radiation, and instead of dying or gaining superpowers, he periodically transforms into a monster called the Hulk, who destroys things, and speaks in monosyllables and feels misunderstood. Period. End of story. And that just goes on for issue after issue after issue. That just goes on. The Hulk goes somewhere, pets a fawn, is misunderstood by the military, is fired upon, goes crazy, destroys things. manages somehow not to destroy people, and then, calms down, becomes Bruce Banner again, and off we go to the next issue. Or Daredevil, for instance. The teenager, Matt Murdock, leaps across the street to protect a blind man from an out-of-control truck containing radioactive toxic sludge, some of which strikes Matt Murdock in the eyes and blinds him. But it also gives him heightened other senses. And for some unknown reason, this promising law student puts on a bright costume and decides to fight crime. He doesn't have a motivation to do that. And what he is for the next 10 years, for 50, 60, 70 issues of Daredevil, is a more brightly colored version of Batman who cannot read the Sunday Times. And it wasn't until decades later, when a certified crackpot came along and reinvented the character of Daredevil from the ground up, that he became interesting. Same thing with this current mess at Marvel Comics with Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel, the name is the marquee signature of Marvel Comics, and yet the Captain Marvel who is about to make her debut in the movies is an adaptation of a comic book character called Carol Danvers, who for a long time was a supporting character in other comics, no-nonsense, very capable military woman, and it occurred to Stan Lee that maybe he should give her superpowers at one point and made her a character. The superpowers that she has are incredibly vague. They've gotten vaguer with time instead of more precise with time. And the origin is as blurry as origins get. Where do her powers come from and what are they? I don't know, something to do with the Kree Empire? And the reason why this current incarnation of Captain Marvel is so vague and tail-chasingly derivative is because the original version of Captain Marvel from Marvel Comics was likewise vague and derivative. An alien called Mar-Vell from the aforementioned Kree Empire who comes to Earth and gains massive superpowers, you think? Like Superman? No. He gains a bit of superpowers, a little here and there. Not much that you'd notice. And he starts to fight crime too, for no reason whatsoever. None whatsoever. And you see this like a virus replicating its way all throughout Marvel Comics. Which is why Marvel Comics and Marvel Comics superheroes are sort of... Marvel Comics superheroes are maladjusted misfit schmucks, which is why Marvel Comics fans tend to be maladjusted misfit schmucks. Whereas across the aisle in DC, you have these legendary heroic characters who are larger than life and who are fighting the forces of evil that are larger than life for the benefit of all mankind. It's a little pop psychology quiz. Which approach to superheroing you like better? And when I was thinking about this Darkseid war, this Justice League Darkseid war. I was thinking about these differences because there's a problem with Darkseid. There's many problems with Darkseid. His vagueness is the main problem, though, and that vagueness extends to everything. Because Darkseid rules a planet. He has unlimited recruiting capabilities. In fact, we're pretty sure that he makes parademons. He doesn't just recruit them. They don't live on Apokolips. He makes them. And there's no reason to believe that he can't make as many of them as he wants. And that raises a problem with a concept like the Justice League. Because if you have a villain who can create an army, well, then you're going to have many supervillains who can do that. Darkseid's not going to be the only one. What he can do with technology, another villain could do with money or mind control. And one way or another, once you get a supervillain who can control an army, then an 8 or 9 person Justice League is a joke, no matter who's on the team. They can't be in 10 places at the same time. Once you have that concept, a supervillain who is not going to rob a bank or steal a precious gem, then you inevitably need a Justice League that has 100 members. And that no DC writer has ever come to grips with that. But on a more personal level, because no matter how many parademons Darkseid controls, no matter how grand his plans are to control the universe or destroy the universe, depending on the day of the week, confrontations with him always come down to mano a mano. Always they do. And when that happens, another problem with Darkseid crops up, which is that he is not well defined. He has energy beams that he can fire from his eyes. They appear to have a viability on their own. He can't control them once they leave his eyes, and they can hurt him if they're somehow redirected to him. So they're obviously something different than something biological that comes out of him. But other than that, if you don't take his eye beams into account, how strong is Darkseid? How invulnerable is he? How fast is he? How much combat experience does he have? We don't know any of these things. He's just a big, amorphous, villain-type guy. And once you think about that, once you realize that when it comes to a face-to-face fight between him and the Justice League, we don't know what he can do, something else occurs to you, which is that is also true of the Justice League. That's also true of DC Comics. And that brings me to the one thing that Marvel Comics does well that DC Comics does not do. The one thing Marvel Comics has that DC Comics doesn't have. And that thing is the greatest book that's ever been written. I am referring, of course, to the official handbook to the Marvel Universe. This is compiled by editors and uber fans from the comics themselves, using the comics as the scientific boundaries for what these characters, heroes and villains, can do and not do. They don't make this anymore. You'd have to go online to get a used copy, but it's incredibly detailed. It's amazing fun for a comic book fan to pick any character that they like, any hero or villain, and see what it is that those heroes and villains can actually do from a cold start. Like, for instance, let's take a look at a couple, shall we? Let's go to the goddess Sif. Some of you will remember her from the Thor movies. She wasn't in Thor Ragnarok. Her place was taken by Valkyrie. But she's a staple in Thor comic books, and she was also, of course, a staple in Norse mythology. But this is the entry for the character Sif. We learn that, we learn her original appearance, we learn her biography, we learn that she is 6'2" tall and weighs 425 pounds. And then we get a precise breakdown of the only thing that fanboys care about, which is her superpowers. And this is what we get. This is amazing. And this is character after character. First, before we get to her superpowers, anybody's superpowers, we get their strength level. And that is not how much weight they can push around on a parking lot. That's how much they can bench press. It's controlled weight. It's how much they can actually lift. Sif possesses the normal strength of an Asgardian woman, a goddess. Of her physical age, height, and build, who engages in intensive, regular exercise, Sif can lift 30 tons. The average Asgardian woman can lift about 25 tons. And then we're told Sif possesses the conventional attributes of an Asgardian woman. Like all Asgardians, she's extremely long-lived, though not immortal, like the Olympian gods, aging at an extremely slow rate upon reaching adulthood, superhumanly strong, immune to all earthly diseases, and resistant to conventional injury. Asgardian flesh and bone is about 3 times denser than similar human tissue, contributing to the god's superhuman strength and weight. Sif's Asgardian metabolism gives her superhuman endurance at all physical activities. We know exactly what Sif can and cannot do. We know her limits. And if you're wondering what to compare that to, let me get you a character that you will know. Let's go to Spider-Man. He's in this same volume. His strength level, Spider-Man, possesses superhuman strength, enabling him to lift 10 tons. Meaning that in the comic books, in the entire run of the comic books up till the time when this encyclopedia was made, that is the heaviest object that any writer and artist have ever shown Spider-Man lifting. In other words, Sif, the goddess girlfriend of the mighty Thor, is significantly stronger than Spider-Man. She could easily defeat him in an arm wrestling contest. But we learn more about Spider-Man's abilities. Spider-Man possesses superhuman strength, reflexes, and equilibrium, the ability to cause parts of his body to stick with greater tenacity to most surfaces, and a subconscious premonitional danger sense. The irradiated common house spider, which bit Peter Parker, was apparently already mutated from prior exposure to certain frequencies of radiation and received a final lethal dose during Parker's attendance at the exhibition where he got his powers. The radioactive, complex, mutagenic enzymes in the spider's blood that were transferred at the time of the bite triggered numerous body-wide mutagenic changes in Peter Parker. Spider-Man's overall metabolic efficiency has been greatly increased, and the composition of his skeleton, interconnective tissue, muscles, and nervous system have all been enhanced. His reflexes are faster than an average human by a factor of 15. He's often able to dodge bullets if he's far enough away. Spider-Man is extraordinarily limber, and his tendons and connective tissue are twice as elastic as the average human beings, despite their enhanced strength. He has developed a unique fighting style that makes full use of his agility, strength, and equilibrium. And on it goes. We get the whole column of Spider-Man's abilities. We learn how his spider stickiness works and how his spider sense works. And it's all very specific. We know its limits. And that is true. The official handbook of the Marvel Universe does that for everybody. And when they get to the rare characters in the Marvel Universe are just incredibly strong. We're not talking 8 tons. We're not talking 40 tons. We're talking just basically unlimited strength. The Hulk, Thor, Hercules, characters like that. When we get to them, the Marvel Comics editors decided to come up with a classification, Class 100, meaning not that the character maxes out at 100 tons, but that the character can lift in excess of 100 tons. A specific upper limit is not defined. And all the rest of it is defined. Everything else is defined. Exactly how much concussive force you would need to break open a wound on the skin of the ever-loving blue-eyed thing. Marvel actually, for a brief time, did that with all of its comic characters. And that means that you can't ever... When you're going by a playbook like this, you can't go as far afield as something as amorphous as Darkseid. You can't ever wonder, for instance, is Darkseid stronger than Aquaman? You don't have to wonder that when you're reading the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. When you're reading a comic book like Justice League Darkseid War, you do, because you know it's going to come down to a fight. And it's no good referring to sources outside of the comic books because they're not canonical. Like, for instance, the great Superman animated cartoon series has Superman fighting Darkseid, and that fight has a winner and a loser. And then in the even greater, the utterly fantastic animated Justice League series and Justice League Unlimited, Superman fights Darkseid alone without the Justice League a couple more times. And again, the results are extremely clear. It's a tough fight, but there is no question that Superman is stronger and that he will win. And that has often made me wish that the wonks at DC Comics, if there are any left, would do an official handbook to the DC Universe. I realize it goes against the ethos of their characters, who are supposed to have one foot firmly planted in mythology, where you don't want to quantify. And also, what on earth would DC characters, or would DC editors be able to do with the past of these characters? What would they be able to do with it? Take an instance that I've written about. Excuse me. In a couple of different points, Wonder Woman, as originally conceived and often as originally portrayed, Wonder Woman is as strong as Superman, and the character has undergone many revisions, many revamps right from the ground up. But at her best, about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, at the character's best realization, she was as strong as Superman. She had a far greater combat experience than Superman did. She could fly, not glide, didn't need her invisible plane. She could fly on her own. And she was also pretty much indestructible. Not just her bullet-deflecting bracelets. But the writers realized it made no sense if those things were bulletproof, but she was not, considering all the other things she is. There was a great moment in one of those Wonder Woman comic books where she's deflecting bullets, and another superhero who's fighting alongside her says, "I don't understand. Aren't you pretty much invulnerable?" And Wonder Woman says, "Yes." And the character says, "Well, then what's with the bracelets?" And Wonder Woman has a perfect response. She says, "Do you imagine I like getting shot?" That's awesome. And that Wonder Woman lasted for a while. For a while, I got to see the character just as it should be done. But those days are over. The Wonder Woman, for instance, in the DC cinematic universe, is clearly not anywhere near as strong as Superman. She's clearly not invulnerable, really tough, but not invulnerable. She clearly can't fly, despite a couple of ambiguous moments in the Wonder Woman movie. And so I don't know what a DC editor would do with that. Like, for instance, if the Justice League, the core Justice League members, were to fight Darkseid, wouldn't they mop the floor with him instantly? I realize he's a big, amorphous, very ominous bad guy, so maybe you can't have your team do that. But isn't Superman alone more powerful than Darkseid? Is Wonder Woman more powerful than he is? We'll leave Batman aside. Batman's a special case. He has no superpowers at all, and yet, with sufficient time and preparation, we are led to believe, and have always been led to believe, could probably beat just about anybody. But what about the Martian Manhunter? A Justice League staple who's unknown outside of the comic books. Or Green Lantern, whose ring can do anything he wills it to do. Why isn't Green Lantern sufficient to defeat Darkseid on his own? Why is that not the case? We're never given the impression that he can, but why can't he? I have no idea. What are the actual physical or technological capabilities of Cyborg? I have no idea. If Darkseid and Aquaman were to plunk their elbows down on a table and arm wrestle, who would win? I don't have any idea. It varies depending on the needs of the writer because the characters are so ill-defined. Their limits are so ill-defined. And I sometimes wish, when I think about something like Justice League Darkseid War, I almost got it today. If my comic shop had been a little closer to my route, I would probably have got it, just out of curiosity. Even though I would have been able to guess that I would be disappointed. But even when I was thinking about it, I was thinking that is what's missing. That is the one thing that's missing from DC Comics that I love so much, is a little more definition. Needed now, I think, more than ever, now that DC's core characters have undergone so many massive conceptual revamps in the last few years. The New 52 introduced, was a company-wide reboot that introduced essentially new versions of these characters, whose power sets were roughly similar, but we didn't know anything like their limits or their upper limits. And the New 52 has been gradually softened and weakened and revamped itself, so that right now, I follow DC Comics. I love them. I love these characters. But if you would ask me right now, right at this minute in DC Comics continuity, can Wonder Woman survive without a suit in the vacuum of space? I have no idea. Does Superman need to breathe underwater? I have no idea. I have no idea. Can the Flash still travel at multiple times the speed of light? Can the Flash still control speed? Not just run really fast, but subtract speed from moving objects or add speed to them. I have no idea. I have no idea the precise limits of these DC characters. And that is a big part of the reason why I didn't have the extra motivation to go the extra distance to get to my comic shop to buy something like Justice League Darkseid War, because I know it's going to come down to a fight, and there's no way for me. It's the artist and the author making things up as they go along, just deciding today it'll be possible, tomorrow maybe not. I don't know. I think I've been spoiled by the official handbook to the Marvel Universe, so that I don't particularly like that, even though Marvel doesn't play by those rules anymore, and never really did. I mean, Thor is a class 100 strength character, but I'd be willing to bet that even at the time that the deluxe handbook to the Marvel Universe was being made, if Thor had a special issue where he was fighting Wolverine, who's a normal guy, he has the strength of a normal guy. He doesn't have super strength at all. He's not invulnerable at all. He's not super fast. He's very fast, but not super fast at all. He's just a guy with razor-sharp, unbreakable knives coming out of his knuckles. In other words, in a fight against Thor, he should last about a fifth of a second. But I'd be willing to bet that even with this Marvel handbook in front of them, the Marvel editors would have had that fight go back and forth, touch and go, for a whole issue or more. So I guess I'm asking for continuity cop where there is none. But one way or another, those are some of my formless rambles on Justice League, problems with Justice League and problems with Darkseid. I haven't looked at the listing for next week, but I'm hoping there'll be something next week that I'll actually be able to hold up and show you. Something that will actually cause me to go to the comic shop. I know some things that are coming, but they're down the line. They're not, they're in the new year, so it won't be them. One way or another, I have nothing to show you. There was no Pentathon this time around to force me to buy an individual issue, so I didn't do that at all. But I thought I'd give you a comic ramble anyway about some of my gripes with Darkseid and the Justice League. And I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.